This is the DIY audiobook. This is the DIY audiobook for What is Intuition? And this is chapter 8. The emergent intuitive paradigm has become much more prevalent in recent years. More and more people seem on board with the framework that lets intuition make sense and are waking up to their intuitive potential. It's exciting. New paradigms, perspectives, and possibilities that were previously unthinkable and unimaginable are opening up and reminding us that we are intuitive. Since 2022, I have been teaching the 3 pillars for cultivating intuition in a group coaching program. The program was designed to address the biggest problems most people have with becoming more connected to their intuition: internalized beliefs and habits relating to not trusting ourselves as knowers, not being familiar with the range of unique and subjective ways we can experience intuition, and not realizing that intuition is a relationship we can cultivate through inner work. All kinds of people benefit from intuition development practice. People who are intuitive and even psychic, but who need validation to own the authority of their inner knowing, and people who don't realize they're intuitive, who benefit from an initiation into the relationship. It seems strange that we would need to cultivate intuition on purpose, but we do. Without our intuitive function active and online, it can be hard to know what's best for us. It can be hard to make decisions. We run our brains around in circles trying to make up our minds. We've been in a dysfunctional relationship to the intuitive function for a long time now. We value it, but don't know how to relate to it. And while we assume we should just know what it is, and even shame ourselves for neglecting intuitive messages, we also crave trusting it more. We need to do this intentional work of cultivating intuition in order to unlearn internalized scientism and to disentangle ourselves from the hyper rationality of our culture. This is a worldview that shapes us and our ways of being, even structuring what we dream of, what we desire, and what we think of as possible. We end up taking for granted things like the idea that time works in a one-dimensional linear direction, or that space is composed of 3 directions, even when physicists tell us there are many more dimensions than this, and that a more accurate picture of reality reflects a nonlinear, non-dual quantum flow. And even though we live in and within this flow, we tend to habitually perceive, believe, and think that the world exists in discrete and discontinuous parts. We think of ourselves this way too. Although human beings are interdependent and relational, we habitually think of ourselves as individuals and strive for independence or pursue self development as if that's a possibility separate from interconnection with the collective. Believing this about ourselves, we minimize the resonance and connection available to us. Not to mention that the presumption of separateness can throw us into chaos when we find ourselves in uncertain situations, because it leaves us without a sense of anchor in the world. So, yes, we need to do the work of cultivating intuition. When I teach this work, I typically start by having participants share their intuition stories. Even people who think they're not intuitive usually have some story to tell. Sometimes hearing someone else's story sparks a memory or a realization. Oh, that was intuition? We tell our stories to normalize them. We realize how common they are. We also share our intuition failures, times when we should have listened but didn't. So we normalize that too. There's healing in sharing stories of our inner process. I ask participants, and I'm asking you, to consider their lived experiences of intuition, their intuition stories, as a primary pointing device. To cultivate intuition, we start with the experience and then make sense of it, unfolding a recursive relationship over time with that part of you that just knows. That's why this book starts with what intuitive experience is like, the common gestures that make up intuitive experience: being in a flow state, being holistic in all senses of that word, creative awareness, meaning making, receptivity to vibes, none of these are material. They're not easily visible, and we have to intentionally learn to identify the experience so we know what to look for when it shows up. Until we connect to intuition on its own terms, mainstream and mass market concepts and ideas about intuition will continue to alienate us from intuitive experience, based in the conflict between how we expect intuition and how we experience it. We either learn that intuition is unreal and too out there, or else it's not flashy enough to be noticed. Starting with the experience also helps us overcome the taboo around the woo of intuition. I call the first pillar of practice mindset because it's about how we think about intuition, what it is, how it works, but it also concerns our attitude and beliefs about it. If we're talking about vibes, resonance, and energy, are you willing to engage with those ideas as valid and legitimate? Or do you resist the woo factor? Do you own up to what you believe about the multiverse and your experience in it? These questions help us develop a framework that embraces intuition as complex and holistic. An intuitive mindset doesn't reduce the world to binaries, but lets it be complex and alive with creative potential. This is the quantum akashic framework, or simply intuition on its own terms. Intuition on its own terms points us to the infinite nuance that exists in the world, nuance that our minds might someday be capable of knowing if we allow that truth exists along a spectrum of potential, always incorporating a degree of uncertainty and appearing to each of us through our unique, culturally informed perspectives. I've suggested an akashic metaphor because it allows for what is yet unknown to also exist. It points to how foreknowledge and other prescient forms of intuition are possible via energies that haven't yet emerged from domains of potential. Akashic awareness presents the self as capable of intuition because it is an integrated, interconnected whole. In considering what intuition is, I've asked you to look at your beliefs and metaphysical choices and to consider incorporating ideas that might seem strange or maybe even wild at first, because intuition is metaphysical or transpersonal. Intuition shows us our connection to other dimensions of experience, layers of consciousness beyond the physical, whether that's to a part of our own mind, heart, body, being, consciousness shared among individuals or groups of people, or that which arises from perceiving collective currents, shared conscious content, or patterns of coherence. The good news is, ironically, we can overcome our fear of the weirdness by embracing the non ordinary parapsychology of it all. If we allow ourselves to accept that consciousness is much more interesting and wacky than we typically give it credit for. Once we accept a theory of intuition on its own terms, we are primed for the ways we can experience intuitive content and the intuitive mode. What seems to be required for intuitive development is shifting the way we relate to ourselves as knowing subjects. We need to see ourselves as having agency, power, and the self-authority to trust our knowing. When we acknowledge intuition on its own terms, we see that more than anything else, intuition is a way of being. Rather than a source of information per se, or a skill or ability, intuition is a part of our nature as embodied conscious beings. The practices we engage with to become more intuitive, inner work, mind body stuff, breath work, energy practice, all of these make us more coherent so we can resonate as and with the information that vibrates through and around us. It's a flow we can get into. In any intuition workshop, we always spend some time learning how to focus and calm our minds. We prepare ourselves to experience extended consciousness using meditation or other contemplative practices that help us become aware of our inner process. Maybe the most difficult part of the work, and why it's not achieved in a single workshop, but over time through mentorship and ongoing reflective practice, is practicing self-awareness, becoming more thoughtful experts of our own minds and interpretive lenses. Self-awareness is the basis of the discernment pillar, where we cultivate a relationship of trust with ourselves so we can more skillfully accept what we have come to know intuitively. In the workshop, I pose the question of how we know intuition is trustworthy. Trusting ourselves becomes a way of healing from the mythos that we are separate and that we don't matter. With intuition on its own terms, I've presented a way of understanding how to establish and assess that trust. We have to consider whether the person doing the intuiting is trustworthy, how big of a lens we are using to assess, and whether we're willing to trust what is unseen, among other things. Getting better at knowing the difference is a matter of diligent, intentional practice in self awareness and in tracking the outcomes of intuition over time. Participants reflect on times in their lives when they haven't listened to their inner knowing and times when they have. They journal, pay attention to their inner experience, and connect with the feelings that have alerted them to their intuition in the past. Usually, they realize how some of their beliefs about intuition have interfered with knowing themselves as intuitive. Through this reflective inner work, we make ourselves conscious of our own connection to the intuitive mode. The work of cultivating intuition on its own terms is both political and spiritual. But this is an existential spirituality we're talking about. Secular, scientific, and pluralist. This is the sense of connection and meaning woven throughout mystical traditions and philosophies. I think of intuition as spiritual in part because of the element of trust involved in perceiving things in the unseen symbolic realm. Trust in this case is akin to belief. There's always a period of uncertainty once you've experienced the intuitive insight, but before its content is confirmed as accurate. Spirituality is also embedded in the holistic nature of intuitive experience, where we feel that information arrives through the body, mind, or spirit, often all at once. This can be a source of confusion because not all intuitive insight is spiritual. As a mode of connection between the self and a greater awareness, the intuitive mode is spiritual, but the content need not be. The politics of intuition are maybe less obvious. Can you imagine a world where people recognize the complexity and unseen elements of our world? Or a world in which people trust their inner knowing, feel connected to an existential sense of spirituality, and include their dreams, visions, and insight as motivation for choices in their lives? If we accepted our interconnectedness as a fact, how might we act? How would we conceive of ourselves? What extended states or stages of consciousness might become available? Our allegiance to objective knowledge production has taken us collectively to the brink of literal disaster, and in some cases, right through to disaster level circumstances. Climate chaos, inequality and injustice, and violent conflicts all arise from justifying actions with rational analysis. The consequences of internalized rationality are not only personal, they're political. As we deepen our connection to intuition, we deepen our relationship to life itself. Becoming more intuitive and trusting our intuitive nature will effectively open the world to us, reveal more of what there is to know, and facilitate a more expanded, expansive imagination so that we inhabit the world in wonder and deep connection. This could even generate an overall shift in consciousness. In our world right now, there is a need to find balance between analytic and intuitive ways of knowing. We need to give ourselves permission to know what we know, yet not let every thought, feeling, or impulse go unexamined. An intuitive approach to knowing responds to that balance by emphasizing a relational process rather than an outcome. It's a path that rests on developing a self aware agency that centers the self and our experiences and allows us to trust our experiences even when they don't make ordinary sense. But here's the thing: when we internalize that everything is connected and shares in some aspect of consciousness, though not necessarily self conscious awareness, there's a vast potential for fellow feeling. The assumption of human-centeredness is diminished, and that's a realization that can offer a profound existential context. We literally cannot live without each other and all the other life of this world. We are all part of a fractal, holographic universe rich with unseen energies. And while most of us usually do not perceive the energies, symbols, and vibrations that make up the nonlinear flow of experience, it doesn't mean that we're not moved by them, nor does it mean we're unaware of the information they convey. Intuition is a relationship we have with ourselves. It's a mode of connection, an experience reliant on resonance throughout the vibrosphere of the unseen dimensions, both within and beyond spacetime. The trick is making space for it in our lives and in our culture. That's when we can experience the full spectrum of consciousness in which intuition thrives and makes sense on its own terms. Thanks for listening to the DIY audiobook of What is Intuition? Resonance, Connection, and Trusting Intuition on Its Own Terms. Make sure you stay subscribed to my channel. There's a lot more intuition theory coming.